Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for convening this hearing at this time on this important matter. When we think about the right to vote, it is clear this is a freedom. This is one that is critical and important to American democracy. And the right to vote, we know, has evolved tremendously over time, including with respect to the voting rights of our First Peoples. American Indians, Alaska Natives, Native Hawaiians deserve an equal opportunity to participate in our American electoral system and political process, period. There has to be that equal opportunity. I've been inspired by the long and storied history of how Native Americans have fought to participate in and improve our nation through the democratic process. This is part of what we have seen in Alaska, where we're proud to share the legacy and the contributions of early Alaska Native civil and voting rights leaders, including Elizabeth Peratrovich. You may have seen her honored on dollar coins in our currency. She is getting that recognition that is due, but our nation has not always supported or honored such leaders. As our witnesses will note in their testimony, in Alaska's 1915 Territorial Act, Alaska Natives were denied citizenship unless they could prove through individual examinations that they had abandoned, quote, any tribal customs or relationship, close quote, and had adopted the habits of a civilized life. Alaska's territorial legislature passed a literacy test which disenfranchised Alaska Natives who had gained citizenship in 1924, but they adopted this literacy test in our state's constitution. Not a good part of our state's history. Native civil rights leaders have worked to overcome obstacles to participation, including deliberate efforts by state legislatures to deny Native Americans the right to vote through policies such as the literacy tests, or sometimes even forcing Native peoples to abandon their cultures. The Voting Rights Act of 1960 made the promise to Native Americans that they would have full legal access to voting. The Voting Rights Act was pivotal in moving our country out of the dark Jim Crow era of American history, but that voting rights legislation, we know, was expanded several times, including back in 1975 to protect language minorities. So with this hearing today, we've got an opportunity, and you note, Mr. Chairman, that this follows on the hearing that they had last week in Senate Judiciary, but this is our opportunity as a committee to hear from Native people about the issues that continue to pose barriers to voting. And these can include things like distance from government offices, geographical isolation, lack of roads, the digital divide, lower educational attainment, socioeconomic conditions, and certainly discrimination. Some of the barriers relate to a lack of basic infrastructure in our Native communities. I know we're trying to get through the process the bipartisan infrastructure bill that will help us in our rural communities, most certainly, but existing disparities continue to affect access to services and can pose obstacles to voting. Several of my colleagues, including Senator Lujan, who just spoke previously, have introduced specific legislation on Native American voting rights that I think attempts to address some of the issues that are affecting Native voting access. So I hope that through this oversight hearing today, we're able to more closely examine that bill through the lens of the Indian Affairs Committee. I'm specifically looking forward to hearing about how the Native voting rights legislation might be implemented, funded, and actually work on the ground. We've got a good panel in front of us today, and we thank them for joining us, but I want to give a particular welcome to Julie Kitka, who is the president of the Alaska Federation of Natives, who's going to be providing testimony on this very important matter today. She is no stranger to this committee, and she is clearly one that we will want to listen to in this very important discussion. So thank you, Mr. Chairman.